Zaleha Marwan thought her wedding to Rizqan Hadef marked the beginning of a sacred bond. But within 24 hours, she was lying bloodied on a cold tile floor. Her husband's rage unleashed after discovering a truth she had hidden her entire life. In the quiet outskirts of Penang, Malaysia, a woman named Zaleha Marwan prepared for what she believed would be the beginning of her happily ever after. At 28 years old, Zaleha had spent most of her adult life avoiding the spotlight, choosing instead to focus on her small home-based tailoring business and her devotion to religion. Her friends often described her as elegant, private, and kind-hearted. She had grown up in a conservative household where modesty and obedience were emphasized, and like many women in her community, marriage was considered a vital step in fulfilling both religious and social expectations. Despite several proposals over the years, Zaleha had remained unmarried. The few men who showed interest seemed either too controlling or not serious. Her past was complicated, and although she had moved beyond it emotionally and physically, she carried it like a fragile secret, a truth too dangerous to reveal, yet too significant to ignore. She prayed often for a partner who would love her for who she was now, not who she had once been. Her prayers seemed answered when she met Rizqan Hadef through a highly respected matrimonial agency in Kuala Lumpur. Rizqan was 32, tall, soft-spoken, and ran a halal export business that traded goods across Southeast Asia. He was also known for his regular presence at the mosque, charity donations, and clean family reputation. His profile impressed Zaleha and her family, and when their conversations began, everything appeared to align. He spoke of loyalty, religious commitment, and his desire for a simple, devoted wife. Their courtship was brief but intense, filled with long discussions over the phone, shared religious beliefs, and visions of a calm future together. For Zaleha's parents, Rizqan seemed like the answer to every parent's prayer. He asked all the right questions, showed proper manners, and even agreed to keep the wedding small and traditional. No one questioned his motives. No one thought to look beneath his polished surface. After just 2 months of contact, a wedding date was set. The ceremony took place in a modest community hall in Bukit Mertajam. The decorations were simple: white roses, green silk drapes, and golden calligraphy that spelled out Quranic blessings above the main table. Zaleha wore a soft ivory dress with laced sleeves and a delicate veil, her eyes lined with kohl, hands covered in intricate henna. Rizqan wore a traditional baju Melayu in dark emerald, his expression calm but unreadable. They exchanged vows in front of a small group of family and close friends, followed by a quiet dinner and soft-spoken congratulations. To an outsider, it looked like a pure and blessed union. As the bride and groom left the hall that night, Zaleha felt a mix of nervousness and peace. She had waited for this day with trembling hope, unsure if it would ever truly arrive. But she had taken a leap of faith, believing that perhaps this time life would reward her courage. The first few hours of married life passed uneventfully. Rizqan remained quiet but polite, occasionally complimenting the food or thanking Zaleha's mother for the arrangements. There were no signs of what would come next, no hints of danger. That night, they stayed at a rented guest house on the edge of town, an arrangement made by Rizqan for privacy before they moved into his home the next day. It was in that silence, behind closed doors, that everything began to change. Within the first 24 hours of marriage, Zaleha would go from a newlywed full of fragile hope to a hospital patient with multiple broken bones. Her dream of building a peaceful life with a pious husband would collapse under the weight of betrayal and violence. And no one, not her family, not her friends, not even the matrimonial agency, could have foreseen the darkness that lurked behind Rizqan Hadef's calm exterior. The truth, once revealed, would shock an entire nation and expose a hidden side of him that no one had dared imagine. By the time sunlight crept through the thin curtains of the guest house, the serene image of a newlywed couple had already shattered. Just hours after their wedding night, Zaleha Marwan found herself crumpled on the floor, her face swollen and her breath shallow. The silence that followed the beating was louder than the violence itself. Pain radiated through her ribs with every movement, and she could feel blood trickling from a cut near her temple. Her veil, once delicately pinned to her head, now lay torn across the floor like a discarded memory. When the guest house manager saw Rizqan carry Zaleha to the car the next morning, her limp figure partially hidden under a shawl, he didn't think much of it. He assumed she was ill, maybe fainted from stress or exhaustion. Rizqan looked composed, even calm, as he loaded her into the passenger seat and drove off. No one questioned him. He took her straight to a nearby clinic, where he told the staff that his wife had slipped and fallen down the stairs. The medical staff, however, quickly sensed that something was wrong. The bruising patterns on her arms and back were not consistent with a fall. There were signs of blunt force trauma, finger-shaped marks, and a fractured rib that raised immediate concern. When they tried to speak to Zaleha, she refused to talk. Her eyes were swollen, but they held something even more telling than fear: shame. After stabilizing her condition, the doctors reported the incident to the local authorities, as per standard protocol in suspected abuse cases. Officers arrived within the hour, but by the time they sought out Rizqan for questioning, he had vanished. His phone was turned off, and the address he had listed on his marriage documents led to a vacant apartment with no signs of occupancy. As the investigation began, Zaleha's family was devastated. Just the day before, they had celebrated her marriage with tears of joy and hopeful prayers. Now they stood by her hospital bed, unable to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. They questioned whether she had known something, anything that could explain Rizqan's behavior. But Zaleha remained silent, not out of guilt, but from fear. She knew the truth, and she also knew the danger that truth carried. The police began to dig into Rizqan's background, starting with the documentation he submitted for the marriage. His identity was legitimate on the surface: Malaysian IC, business license, a verified bank account. But once they looked deeper, inconsistencies emerged. His business had no physical office, only a virtual address. The contact number listed for his previous employer was disconnected. His social media presence was minimal and generic, with no photos of friends or family, only religious quotes and business ads. More alarming, they discovered that Rizqan had been married before, twice. Both marriages had ended within days. No formal divorce papers had been filed, and the women involved were untraceable. One had reportedly moved overseas. The other, according to neighbours, simply disappeared. No police reports had ever been filed, and because the weddings were small and largely undocumented, no one paid attention when they ended abruptly. These revelations painted a disturbing picture of a man who had crafted an image of religious and social perfection while hiding a history of manipulation, control, and potential violence. He had passed through the system without raising any red flags, blending in with the expectations of culture and faith. His charm had fooled not only Zaleha, but her family, the marriage agency, and even the community. Zaleha's condition slowly stabilized, but her trauma was far from over. She remained under medical supervision, and a police officer was stationed outside her room for protection. Meanwhile, the man who had vowed to cherish her for life had vanished into thin air. With no credit card activity, no travel records, and no sightings, it was as if he had never existed. But the damage he left behind was real and permanent. What began as a celebration of love had turned into a national investigation. And the question everyone now asked was the same. Who exactly was Rizqan Hadef, and how many lives had he already ruined before Zaleha's? As Zaleha lay in her hospital bed, wrapped in bandages and silence, the walls around her felt tighter with every hour. The physical wounds were healing, but the weight of the truth pressed heavier on her chest than any broken bone. She had told no one the full story. Not her family, not the police, not even the doctor, who gently urged her to speak. But the fear inside her had grown louder than the pain. She knew that silence might protect her temporarily, but it could never hide what Rizqan had discovered that night, and that truth was why he had nearly killed her. After days of inner torment, Zaleha finally revealed what had happened during the first night of her marriage. It wasn't about a disagreement, a misunderstanding, or even a sudden change in Rizqan's behavior. It was about a discovery. That night, as they prepared to sleep in the quiet guest house, Rizqan had realized that Zaleha was not the woman he believed her to be. Through a series of questions and invasive suspicions, he uncovered the truth Zaleha had spent years carefully burying. She had been assigned male at birth and had undergone gender-affirming surgery 5 years earlier. Zaleha had transitioned with dignity and in private. It was a decision made for her happiness, her safety, and her ability to live as the woman she always knew she was. In her heart, her faith and identity were never in conflict. She had worked tirelessly to build a new life, one in which she could be proud of who she had become. But that night, the truth emerged, not with compassion or understanding, but with cruelty and violence. Rizqan had erupted in fury, accusing her of betrayal and sin. He attacked her with such force that the room became a scene of chaos. No neighbors heard, and the isolated guest house offered no protection. By morning, she was barely conscious. What shocked her most was not the pain, but the hatred she saw. In his eyes, hatred that had no mercy, no boundaries, and no remorse. When Zaleha finally spoke this truth to authorities, the reaction was a mix of disbelief and silence. In Malaysia, topics related to gender identity were often buried under societal judgment and legal grey zones. While violence could never be justified, some questioned why Zaleha had not told Rizqan before the marriage. Others questioned whether the marriage was even valid under religious law. But for the police, the central issue remained. A woman had nearly been killed, and the man responsible was missing. The revelation changed everything. What had been seen as a domestic abuse case now drew national attention. Zaleha's story became a lightning rod for public debate. Her name, though protected by law, spread across social media. While some users showed support, praising her bravery, others hurled insults, questioning her morality and accusing her of deceit. The backlash was intense, and the hospital had to move her to a secure ward under police supervision to protect her from possible threats. Religious leaders weighed in. Human rights groups issued statements. Zaleha, still bruised and emotionally shattered, became the unwilling face of a discussion the country had long avoided. Her story sparked questions far beyond her own pain, about identity, law, religion, and what protection truly meant for people like her. Meanwhile, Rizqan remained a ghost. Investigators believed he had fled the state, possibly even the country. His sudden disappearance suggested planning, maybe even help from others. What had once looked like a man caught in a fit of rage now resembled a calculated escape by someone with secrets of his own. But Zaleha refused to hide again. She agreed to give a statement to the press under strict anonymity, not to gain sympathy, but to ensure that her story would not be silenced. She knew that others like her existed, living in fear, hiding their truths. If her pain could mean something, anything for someone else, then perhaps it wasn't in vain. The investigation was no longer just about a runaway groom. It had become something bigger. It had become a search for justice in a society that still struggled to define what justice looked like for people like Zaleha. The hunt for Rizqan Hadef intensified as national and international agencies got involved. With Zaleha's shocking testimony now recorded and partially leaked to the press, law enforcement knew the case had become more than a simple act of domestic violence. It was now a potential hate crime, a calculated attack on a vulnerable individual, and possibly part of a broader pattern of criminal behavior. Interpol issued a notice for Rizqan, suspecting he might have fled to Indonesia or Brunei using alternate identification. The lack of digital footprints from his phone or bank accounts suggested he had help or had planned his escape long before the attack. Investigators revisited every trace of his identity: birth records, employment history, past relationships. What they discovered painted a much darker picture than anyone had imagined. Years before meeting Zaleha, Rizqan had lived under different aliases in several Malaysian states. In each place, he presented himself as a devout businessman and offered marriage proposals to vulnerable women, especially those with little family or social connections. Records of 3 previous engagements surfaced, each ending abruptly. One woman had filed a police report in Kedah, claiming she was assaulted by a man matching Rizqan's description. But the case had been dropped due to lack of evidence and her sudden disappearance. Another, a nurse in Johor, was rumoured to have been blackmailed with private information after refusing his proposal. Authorities now believed that Rizqan's attack on Zaleha was not a one-time outburst, but part of a disturbing pattern. He seemed to target women who carried secrets, vulnerabilities, or social isolation. His charm and religious image served as a mask, one he used to gain trust before exerting control. What set Zaleha's case apart, however, was that she survived, and she spoke. Zaleha, now recovering in a secure rehabilitation centre, faced a growing storm of public attention. Although her identity was legally protected, the media frenzy led to her being partially doxxed. Online hate intensified. Accusations flooded in, with people questioning her right to marry, her gender identity, and even her faith. Religious panels debated her case on national television, and her name became a polarizing symbol, admired by some, condemned by others. But amidst the chaos, support emerged. Women's rights organizations, LGBTQ+ advocates, and human rights. Lawyers came forward to defend her rights. They condemned the attack, criticized the social silence around gender-based violence, and demanded legal reforms. Zaleha's story pushed uncomfortable truths into the national spotlight, forcing society to confront questions long buried under taboo. One particular breakthrough came when a tip was received from a woman in Sabah who claimed to recognize Rizqan's photo. She said he had been staying at a coastal resort under the name Rahman Salah and had recently boarded a cargo ship headed toward Kalimantan. This lead reignited the search, and Malaysian authorities coordinated with Indonesian police to monitor ports and nearby islands. As officials closed in, Zaleha worked on reclaiming her life. Though the physical wounds had mostly healed, the emotional scars remained. She stayed in therapy, rarely left the facility, and only spoke to her immediate family. Her relationship with her parents had become strained, not due to their lack of love, but because of the societal shame they now faced. Still, her strength never wavered. She began documenting her experience, not for publicity, but as a personal record of survival. A surprising twist came when forensic investigators accessed Rizqan's abandoned apartment in Selangor. Hidden behind a false wall, they discovered a locked cabinet filled with passports, IDs, and photos of different women. Each file contained personal data, some likely stolen, others gathered during his interactions with potential spouses. It became clear that Rizqan had not only lived a double life, but had built an entire system of deception. He was not merely a violent husband, he was a predator who had operated in silence for years. As Chapter 4 of this tragedy unfolded, it was no longer just about Zaleha. Her story had peeled back layers of deception, shame, and systemic failure. A national manhunt was underway, but even if Rizqan was caught, the wounds left behind would not vanish. The real question lingered. How many others had suffered in silence? And how many more would, if nothing changed? It was a humid morning on the coast of East Kalimantan, when Indonesian authorities intercepted a small cargo vessel believed to be carrying illegal migrants. Among the passengers was a man travelling under the name Rahman Salah. He kept his head low, avoided speaking, and clutched a small satchel containing a few articles of clothing and a fake Indonesian ID. But when authorities ran his fingerprints, everything changed. The man was Rizqan Hadef, the fugitive groom who had sparked a nationwide manhunt and a national debate in Malaysia. Within 24 hours, he was placed in custody and extradited back to Kuala Lumpur under tight security. News of his arrest spread across Malaysia within minutes. Social media erupted. Some demanded justice, some remained silent, while others reignited debates about gender identity, morality, and religious interpretation. For Zaleha Marwan, now living in a protective facility outside the city, the moment brought little relief. The man who had nearly killed her was finally caught, but the damage he left behind remained deeply embedded in every part of her life. Still, she chose to testify. In court, Rizqan appeared calm, as if unaffected by the media storm or the mounting charges. He denied nothing, yet showed no remorse. His defense leaned heavily on cultural outrage and betrayal. His lawyers claimed he had been deceived, that he had reacted in a moment of religious and emotional shock, and that his actions, though regrettable, were driven by confusion, not hate. But the prosecution told a different story. They presented a detailed timeline of his manipulative behavior, the multiple false identities, and evidence from his secret cabinet of stolen information. Witnesses testified. One woman from Johor, who had narrowly escaped marrying him, another from Kedah, who recalled being threatened after trying to end their engagement. For the first time, a pattern was undeniable. Rizqan had spent years targeting women, especially those with limited support or secrets of their own. He manipulated social expectations, used religion as a shield, and disappeared when things became complicated. But it was Zaleha's statement that broke the courtroom silence. Delivered through a closed session and later released in transcript form, she spoke not only of the night she was attacked, but of the life she had built, the risks she had taken, and the betrayal she had suffered. She spoke without anger, only truth. Her words shifted public opinion. Some who had once criticized her began to understand the depth of her vulnerability and strength. Others still struggled to accept her identity, but could no longer deny the brutality she endured. The court sentenced Rizqan Hadef to 18 years in prison for attempted murder, identity fraud, and multiple counts of aggravated assault. He showed no reaction as the sentence was read. As he was escorted out, one reporter noted that he looked almost relieved, perhaps because the hunt was over, or perhaps because he knew he had finally been unmasked. Following the trial, the Malaysian government came under pressure to review policies surrounding legal gender recognition, marriage registration, and domestic violence. Zaleha's case had forced uncomfortable questions into the light. How could someone change their legal identity and still face such vulnerability? Why had the marriage agency failed to vet Rizqan properly? And most of all, how could society better protect those living in silence out of fear? Zaleha quietly declined all interview offers. She didn't want fame or sympathy. Her goal was not to become a public figure, but to survive and rebuild. With the help of a few trusted advocates, she moved to a new town under a different name, far from the city where her life had almost ended. There, she started her tailoring business again, taking in quiet orders, sending out beautiful garments, and slowly reclaiming the rhythm of life. But she never forgot. And neither did the nation. The case of Zaleha Marwan became a turning point in how Malaysia viewed violence, secrecy, and identity. For years, her story would be discussed in classrooms, legal reforms, and community halls, not because she had been a victim, but because she had refused to stay silent. In the end, her courage spoke louder than her past, and louder than the man who tried to silence her.